an announcement in the coming months.
Simon Danchuk.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Grade 1 listed Rochdale Town Hall has been described as a rare, picturesque beauty. A bid to renovate this iconic building was rejected by the Heritage Lottery Fund in April. Of the 5 projects awarded grants, all 5 are based in the south of England. Would the Prime Minister consider supporting the renovation of this fantastic municipal building?
Well, the honourable gentleman is right. It is a beautiful building, and it is a historic town that he represents. In terms of the Heritage Lottery Fund, I think he's being a little unfair on focusing just on those last 5 projects. I think if he looks more broadly, he'll find, for instance, that the Blackpool Museum, I think, received a grant of over 13 million. So it is, I believe, fairly balanced across the country, but I will look further and perhaps write to him about the general point and the specific issue of his town hall.
James Berry.
Mr. Speaker, as well as Brits living abroad in the EU, there are a number of EU nationals living in this country, in my constituency, working hard, paying their taxes entirely legitimately. What reassurance can the Prime Minister give them that their position is secure? Because I know a number are very concerned.
Well, first of all, I think the first thing to do is to praise the contribution that they make to our country. There are 50,000 EU nationals working in our NHS. There are 60,000 working in our care sector, looking after our elderly as they come towards the end of their life. There are many working in education. As I said quite exhaustively on Monday, obviously we can say that all rights are guaranteed as we're members of the European Union. In the future, we will have to make sure, and I've heard members of the Leave campaign make this point, that people who are already here, people who are already studying, people who are working, must have their rights and their access guaranteed. But we can't say that now. We have to say that as part of the negotiation that will shortly take place.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, can I join with the tributes to you for all that you've done in your time of office? Does the Prime Minister agree that whatever the disagreements about the European Union, Prime Minister, you were in the Remain camp, I and my party were in the Leave campaign. The union that really matters is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and preserving that should be of the utmost importance. It works and it's staying together. Prime Minister, what has been done to make sure that happens in your remaining time in office?
Well, first of all, let me thank the honourable gentleman for his remarks, and let me agree with him that keeping the United Kingdom together is an absolute paramount national interest for our country. Because of the decision that's been made about Europe, we need to have exhaustive conversations between officials in Whitehall and in Northern Ireland, and very strong relations with the Republic of Ireland, so we keep the benefits of the common travel area. As for the honourable gentleman, he's always supported one blue team, Leicester City, and one day I hope he'll support another blue team, but there we are.
Mr. Kevin Ollenrake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As members of the single market for over 4 decades, many businesses have deeply embedded supply chains and customer relationships right across the EU. Does the Prime Minister agree that any future deal with the EU must include access to the single market?
I think my honourable friend is absolutely right, but obviously the term access to the single market has many potential different meanings. Obviously countries outside the EU have access to the single market, some through a trade deal, some through World Trade Organization rules. Obviously the best access is to be a member of the single market, and what the country is going to have to decide, and what the next Prime Minister will have to decide, is what sort of access that we want, what are the costs and benefits of having that access, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in a moment when I give my statement on the European Council.
Finally, Neil Gray.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will be aware that Terex Trucks in my constituency is consulting its staff and unions this week to shed a sixth of its workforce, and the company has approached the UK Government to receive support from the UK Export Finance, but from that £40 billion fund has only received a guarantee to the value of one of its trucks. Will he commit to meet with me to discuss this perilous situation for the company and its workforce, and what support his government can provide?
Well, first of all, I'm aware of the recent announcement about these further job losses, and this is obviously going to be a difficult time for the workers and their families. I understand both the Scottish and the UK Government have been working closely together with the company over the past couple of years as part of the Partnership Action for Continuing Employment scheme. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Scotland, is also keeping a close eye on the situation, and I'm happy to arrange a meeting between him and the honourable gentleman to talk about what more can be done.
Statement The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a statement on yesterday.
The Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, Mr. Speaker, I would like to make a statement on yesterday's European Council. This was the first Council since Britain decided to leave the European Union. The decision was accepted, and we began constructive discussions about how to ensure a strong relationship between Britain and the countries of the European Union. But before the discussion on Britain, there were a number of other items on the agenda, and let me touch on them briefly. On migration, the Council noted the very significant reductions in illegal crossings from Turkey to Greece as a result of the agreement made with Turkey in March, but it expressed continued concern over the central Mediterranean route and a determination to do all we can to combat people smuggling via Libya. Britain continues to play a leading role in Operation Sophia with HMS Enterprise, and I can tell the House today that Royal Fleet Auxiliary Mounts Bay will also be deployed to stop the flow of weapons to terrorists, particularly Daesh in Libya. On NATO, Secretary-General Stoltenberg gave a presentation ahead of the Warsaw Summit, and the Council agreed the need for NATO and the EU to work together in a complementary way to strengthen our security. On completing the single market, there are important commitments on the digital single market, including that EU residents will be able to travel with the digital content they've purchased or subscribed to at home. On the economic situation, the President of the European Central Bank gave a presentation in the light of the outcome of our referendum. Private sector forecasts discussed at the Council included estimates of a reduction in Eurozone growth, potentially between 0.3% and 0.5% over the next 3 years. One of the main explanations for this is the predicted slowdown in the UK economy, given our trade with the euro area. President Draghi reassured the Council that the ECB has worked with the Bank of England for many months to prepare for uncertainty. And in the face of continued volatility, our institutions will continue to monitor markets and act as necessary. Mr. Speaker, returning to the main discussions around Britain leaving the EU, the tone of the meeting was one of sadness and regret. But there was an agreement that the decision of the British people should be respected. And we had positive discussions about the relationship we want to see between Britain and our European partners and the next steps on leaving the EU, including some of the issues that need to be worked through and the timing for triggering Article 50. Let me say a word about each. First, we were clear that while Britain is leaving the European Union, we are not turning our backs on Europe, and they are not turning their backs on us. Many of my counterparts talk warmly about the history and the values that our countries share, and the huge contribution that Britain has made to peace and progress in Europe. For example, the Estonian Prime Minister described how the Royal Navy helped to secure the independence of his country a century ago. The Czech Prime Minister paid tribute to Britain as a home for Czechs fleeing persecution. Many of the countries of Eastern and Central Europe expressed the debt they feel to Britain for standing by them when they were suffering under communism and for supporting them as they joined the European Union. And President Hollande talked movingly about the visit that he and I will be making later this week to the battlefields of the Somme, where British and French soldiers fought and died together for the freedom of our continent and the defence of the democracy and the values that we share. So the Council was clear that as we take forward this agenda of Britain leaving the European Union, we should rightly want to have the closest possible relationship that we can in the future. In my view, this should include the strongest possible relationship in terms of trade, cooperation, and of course security, something that only becomes more important in the light of the appalling terrorist attack in Turkey last night. Mr. Speaker, as I said on Monday, as we work to implement the will of the British people, we also have a fundamental responsibility to bring our country together. We will not tolerate hate crime or any kinds of attacks against people in our country because of their ethnic origin. And I reassured European leaders who were concerned about what they had heard was happening in Britain. We are a proud, multi-faith, multi-ethnic society, and we will stay that way. Turning to the next steps on leaving the EU, first there was a lot of reassurance that until Britain leaves, we are a full member. That means we're entitled to all the benefits of membership and full participation until the point at which we leave. Second, we discussed some of the issues which will need to be worked through. I explained that in Britain there was great concern about the movement of people and the challenges of controlling immigration, as well as concerns about the issue of sovereignty. Indeed, I explained how these had come together. In turn, many of our European partners were clear that it is impossible to have all the benefits of membership without some of the costs of membership. And that is something that the next Prime Minister and their Cabinet is going to have to work through very carefully. Third, on the timing of Article 50, contrary to some expectations, there wasn't a great clamour for Britain to trigger this straight away. While there were one or two voices calling for this, the overwhelming view of my fellow leaders was that we need to take some time to get this right. Of course, everyone wants to see a clear blueprint in terms of what Britain thinks is right for its future relationship with the EU. And as I explained in my statement on Monday, we're starting this work in terms of what Britain thinks is right for its future relationship with the EU. And as I explained in my statement on Monday, we're starting this work straight away with a new unit in Whitehall, which will be led by a new Permanent Secretary, Oliver Robbins. This unit will examine all the options and possibilities in a neutral way, setting out the costs and benefits, so that the next Prime Minister and their Cabinet will have all the information they need with which to determine exactly the right approach to take and the right outcome to try and negotiate. But the decisions that follow from this, including the triggering of Article 50, are rightly for the next Prime Minister. And the Council clearly understood and, I believe, respected that. Mr. Speaker, I don't think it's a secret that I have at times found discussions in Brussels frustrating. But despite that, I do believe we can be proud of what we've achieved, whether it's putting a greater focus on jobs and growth, cutting the EU budget in real terms for the first time, reducing the burden of red tape on business, or building common positions on issues of national security, such as sanctions to stop Iran getting a nuclear weapon, standing up to Russian aggression in the Ukraine, and galvanising other European countries to help with the lead that Britain was taking in dealing with Ebola in Sierra Leone. In all these ways and more, we've shown how much more we have in common with our European partners as neighbours and allies and friends who share fundamental values, history and culture. It's a poignant reminder that while we will be leaving the European Union, we must continue to work together for the security and prosperity of our people for generations to come. And I commend this statement to the House.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to thank the Prime Minister for an advance copy of this statement. And as he took part in what I assume will be his last ever EU Council summit, I was very pleased he took a more conciliatory tone in relation to European neighbours than Nigel Farage did in the European Parliament yesterday. As we negotiate our exit from the European Union, the British people are relying on a government to facilitate as positive a transition as possible. And if we are to achieve this, we must proceed in a constructive and decent manner. I look forward to joining the Prime Minister, as I said at question time, at the commemoration of the Somme on Friday. He was right, too, to emphasise the role played by Britain in Europe in negotiating agreement with Iran and securing support for action to tackle the Ebola crisis in Sierra Leone. So I thank the Prime Minister for that. Yesterday, the Prime Minister said at the EU Council summit that in order to strike a new relationship between Britain and the European Union, European leaders would have to offer the UK more control over immigration. The threat of losing access to the single market means we're already seeing a negative effect on investment and business in this country. On Monday, the Prime Minister said access to the single market without accepting free movement was impossible. Does the Prime Minister now believe that Britain can negotiate an unprecedented deal? Can he also spell out a little more clearly than his statement what further discussions were held in this area? This is an issue in which there needs to be an open debate, dare I say an open and straight-talking debate that absolutely failed to materialise during much of the referendum campaign. The Prime Minister stated in the House on Monday that Article 50 will not be triggered until his successor is in place. I heard what he just said about the views of other leaders at the summit. When does he expect Article 50 actually to be triggered so we'll know what the negotiating timetable is? As I raised in my response to the Prime Minister on Monday, we in the House have a duty to act in the national interest and ensure we get the best agreement for all of our constituents. Does the Prime Minister feel that without the structures in place for this House to debate the alternatives and lead a discussion in our communities, there is a risk of leaving Britain in a state of paralysis at a time when people need clear answers to their concerns? And would he also be able to tell us if there's been any further thought about the role of devolved governments in future negotiations with the European Union? We've seen today the First Minister of Scotland creating her own separate negotiating group and starting talks with the EU, and it appears the Minister of Gibraltar is doing the same also. What conversations has the Prime Minister had with the First Ministers in Scotland and Wales, and what legal advice he has received on separate negotiations by devolved administrations and indeed overseas territories? I welcome his commitment that HMS Enterprise will continue to play its part in Operation Sophia. Last week's vote to leave the EU means this country is currently in an unstable position. The next steps we take may be our most important and must be taken with care. We have a duty now to reshape and rebuild an economy for the future, one that protects social and employment rights and builds new policies on trade, migration, environmental protection and on investment, and deliver a country in which prosperity we create is shared by all. Therefore, I urge the Prime Minister and whoever his successor deliver a country in which prosperity we create is shared by all. Therefore, I urge the Prime Minister and whoever his successor may be that what our economy needs now is a clear plan for investment, not further austerity and cuts to public services. That the Chancellor put forward yesterday. I also urge the Prime Minister and his successor one more time to look at the suspension and preferably the termination of his now even more counterproductive fiscal rule. I thank the Prime Minister for the assurances and condemnation he gave of racist attacks and abuse wherever they occur in this country, and I join him in that. We all need to calm our language and tone and across all parts of this House condemn the rise of racism within our society. Will he also reiterate absolutely his assurance to European Union nationals working here, providing support in our health service and so many other services, that they are welcome and that they remain welcome for the work and contribution they make? Mr. Speaker, our country is divided, so we must heal that division. Our economy is fragile, so we must begin to rebuild it. Our duty now is to move forward in a calm and conciliatory manner to build a new relationship with Europe and build a Britain that works for everyone in every part of this country.
Prime Minister.
Well, let me thank the right honourable gentleman for his response and the way he's gone about it. I think he's right that constructive is the correct word. I was pleased that the discussions last night did not get off to a tone of European Union countries demanding this set of actions, Britain's arguing for that set of actions. There was a mature and calm understanding that we need each other. We need this negotiation to proceed well. We need it to have a good outcome. It's in all our interests. So I think it has got off on the right foot, and I will do everything I can, whether in this job or in as a backbench MP, to make sure we keep those strong relationships with our European partners, because we're going to need to. On this issue of immigration versus the single market, he's right. This is, frankly, the biggest and most difficult issue to deal with. Frankly, whether you're in the European Union, as we have been arguing for changes, or whether you're out of the European Union trying to secure the best possible access to the single market. My answer to the problem was to bring in the welfare restrictions that I negotiated, which were incredibly tough to negotiate. I'm sad those now fall away because of the referendum decision. But there's no doubt the next government's going to have to work very hard at this. And I personally think that access to the single market and the strength of our economy is the single most important issue that they have to deal with. On the issue of Article 50, look, it is a matter for the next Prime Minister. And there's a very good reason for that, which is that before you go into the tunnel of the Article 50 negotiations, which have a 2-year time limit, you want to have made the best possible preparations for the precise blueprint you want to achieve at the end. That will help Britain, and frankly it will help the other European Union countries to understand what it is that we are shooting for. Now, they have said no negotiation without notification, but I don't think that excludes discussions that a new Prime Minister can have with partners or indeed with the institutions, so that we continue to get off on the right foot, and that is the strong advice that I would give to them. In terms of the devolved institutions, I've had conversations with the First Minister of Scotland, First Minister in Wales, Deputy and First Ministers in Northern Ireland. I'll continue to do so. I want them to be as involved as possible. I want their voices to be heard loud and clear. In terms of legal advice, the legal advice I've seen is that this is a UK decision made by the United Kingdom government and United Kingdom Parliament, and it has to be done in that way. On what he said about racism, I completely agree. We should all reiterate the statements that we've made. To EU nationals that are here, we should thank them for their contribution, say that their rights are guaranteed while we remain in the EU, and we'll be working hard, and I'm sure all contenders in the Conservative leadership campaign will want to make clear that, they want to safeguard the rights of people who work here and study here from the European Union for the future. But that will be a matter for them. Finally, what he says about suspending the fiscal rule, I have to say it does feel a little bit like a stuck record. Whatever the problem, whatever the issue, the answer always seems to be more borrowing, more spending, more taxing and more debt. And I have to say that isn't you don't get investment unless you have economic stability. And you don't have economic stability if you don't have a plan for dealing with your debts and your deficit. This has been proved the world over, including in some of his favourite countries like Venezuela. And I really would argue not to go down that route.
Sir William Cash.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend quite rightly has referred to trade and